Weapon Testing, Episode 1. Sandra twisted, bouncing from one foot to another as a wide grin split her face. She loved this. Every moment of anger she'd suffered, channeled into each punch and kick. At her feet, her opponent groaned in pain, slowly pushing himself back from the leather padding of the floor.
What's the matter, bitch?
The soldier shook his head, struggling to control his emotions over the swell of pheromones around her. Her smile only widened, twisting cruelly as she willed him to fight. He staggered to his feet, shaking his head again as he tried to assume a fighting stance. Instead, his teeth clenched, and he roared. The soldier charged forward recklessly, years of training abandoned in the swelling fire of anger that clouded his mind. Sandra gave him no mercy, easily stepping aside before brutally punching him to the ground. She turned to the observers, watching from the viewing window, her arms stretched out from her sides.
Is that it?
She spat to the floor challengingly, the elation and adrenaline of battle surging through her as she smirked at the sight of two paramedics entering the room to retrieve the broken man upon the floor. Snipe watched her impassively from the observation room, silent as the scientists busied themselves checking the readings displayed on the screens around them. With a hiss of hydraulics, the door in the room opened, and Solarus himself stepped inside, his cane tapping against the floor with each labored step.
Well?
The level of pheromones is impressive, enough to overwhelm even basic filters at close range. They are a mix of chemicals, particularly testosterone, all in mind to drive aggression and base instinct.
She lacks finesse.
Well, yes. But the mutation has certainly been successfully implemented. The set is bonded with her cells perfectly.
Without a word, Solarus stepped closer to the glass, looking down at the red-haired woman who stood impatiently for the next fight in the middle of the training chamber below.
The fire manipulation is potent, though a little crude. Other than that, she's stronger than she would appear, with enhanced reflexes, bone strength, and tissue regeneration. The standard things we would expect.
We found another fast healer?
No, nothing compared to some others we have observed from earlier tests. But she meets the basic standards we'd expect from those exposed to the procedure.
A pity. Is she skilled?
Snipe turned her head slightly to Solarus at the question. Alexander Darrow waited patiently for her response, but she gave it only grudgingly.
She is a proficient brawler, but she has no technique and no desire to learn one.
You seem unimpressed.
Snipe didn't respond, and Solarus allowed himself a small smile, wondering what it was about the redhead mutant below that riled her so.
So, you're keeping me fucking waiting here?
Perhaps we should observe her facing a greater challenge then.
He nodded to the scientist nearby, who at once began giving orders into the earpiece he wore. Moments later, the door into the training chamber opened, and a group of armored soldiers entered. Each was armed with a riot shield and baton, bracing themselves for battle as they surrounded her. Sandra frowned, her eyes darting from one opponent to another as she readied her fists.
Alright then, you fuckers.
The first soldier charged, sweeping his baton high. She ducked aside, blocking another strike from a second guard as she twisted and dodged. Grabbing the first soldier by the collar, she pulled him in front of her, using him to shield her from the soldiers threatening to surround her.
She is fast.
No more than they normally are.
Sandra snarled, punching the soldier's throat before taking two hard hits. She ducked from another, bringing her fist up under the soldier's chin with a crack of breaking bone. Two more struck at her legs and she buckled, dropping to one knee before rolling, tripping one of her assailants and grabbing his shield. The soldiers around her were becoming reckless, the pheromones taking their insidious effect as training melted to mere instinct. She took full advantage, the edge of the shield punching through the soldier's visor before she retrieved the baton and savagely beat off her attackers. In the heat of the moment, she didn't think twice as she knocked one flying to the floor. Before they could even gasp, the end of the baton she held was lodged into their throats.
What background do we have on her again?
Extensive criminal record. Mostly assault and disorderly conduct. But it was a murder she went to prison for. She was a common soldier before her imprisonment. Dishonorably discharged, though.
Why?
Uncertain. Records imply involvement in a case of false accusation. They were very vague on the matter. Typical army legal documents. Apart from that, no family to speak of. One miscarriage a little prior to her conviction. Otherwise, psychological evaluation suggested mild psychopathic tendencies and anxiety. Nothing out of the ordinary.
Solarus looked again to Snipe, but the assassin did not even turn to him. Instead, keeping her focus on the brutality of the melee below.
Let's up the ante. Send in another squad, fully armed this time.
Sandra grimaced as she rose, her adrenaline hot and coursing through her veins as she gave a ferocious final kick to the face of the last of the soldiers. Even as they groaned or bled around her, the door slid open again. Another squad entering rapidly and raising assault rifles.
Fuck.
She flung the broken batting she held at the first, knocking him to the floor even as the next opened fire. Bullets peppered the far wall as she rolled aside. 3 shots impacted onto the riot shield as she desperately brought up one of the discarded barricades to defend her. It buckled under the fire, and the soldiers started to spread. The guns barked again, but this time the muzzle flares were warped strangely, twisting from the guns to whisper through the air like ghost lights. The soldiers hesitated, and Sandra struck. The flash of sparks opening into the pulses of flame would burst from the ammo packs within the rifles. Several of the soldiers flinched, another thrown aside as his gun exploded. Parker took her chance and ran through the confusion. A soldier brought up his rifle as Sandra rushed towards him. She knocked it aside as the shot slashed past her, drawing a line of blood from her arm. Around them, the fires continued to grow, pulled to Sandra as she raised up one hand. As though by instinct, the flames coiled about her palm like a blowtorch's flame, and with a roar of fury she drove a white-hot spike into the soldier's chest. Another soldier raised his weapon, and Sandra snapped her hand towards him as fires engulfed the man like a flock of ravenous demons. Even as he died, Sandra twisted, slashing the white-hot torch at her palm through the neck of another rifle. The soldier wielding it staggered back, panicking as Sandra's hatred overwhelmed her. As they fell dead to the floor, the last 2 soldiers opened fire, forcing her to run as flashes of flame and smoke covered her retreat. She circled, coming about as a sudden wash of fire heralded her charge. The soldiers flinched, and at once she was among them. A vicious punch cracked the visor from one, tearing his helmet from his head even as the other raised his gun. She grabbed it, roaring as she pulled it from him, and rammed the butt of the gun into his throat. Without thinking, she shouldered the weapon, aiming up at the observation window and firing. The shot cracked the glass by Solarus, but it did not penetrate. As she lowered the gun, he smiled, watching the flames subside.
No technique? I think we'll need to find a few more soldiers.
Her flame wielding is quite simplistic. The last subject was far more skilled.
The last subject isn't here. Besides, I think the soldiers below might be disagreeing with you.
He watched as Sandra calmed, the flames around her dying. She tossed aside the rifle, glaring up at them for a moment, before looking to regard her hand, still wrapped in flames.
What the fuck did you people do to me?
She's wild. Too dangerous to rely on.
She may be what I need.
Though impossible to say through her mask, Snipe seemed unsettled at his admission. Without commenting further, Solarus leant forward, pressing the button by the window that activated the mic.
I think you've shown yourself more than capable of killing my men.
Why don't you come down here, sweet cheeks? I'll show you exactly what I'm capable of.
I have a task for you, something I think a little more suited to your talents.
Better be. Maybe this time if you're going to fucking shoot at me, you can give me something a little sturdier than a fucking nylon shirt.
Perhaps you'll like what we have for you. I think it was time both you and it were given a proper test.
This not test enough for you? What, I have to prove to you fuckers now that I'm worthy or some shit?
I need assurances, time you make good on our agreement.
He turned to Snipe. the assassin still watching her silently.
Get her suited. Specialist Target 22, Code Delta. I want to see how far she's willing to go.